What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com. Emergency edition. We are brought to you by Johnny T-Shirts. All right, emergency edition of the Coast to Coast podcast. As you all are aware, if we're doing an emergency pod, it means there has been some sort of tectonic shift in the world of Carolina basketball, and today is no exception. Unfortunately, probably not the positive one you're used to hearing from us, because typically when we join you, we're talking about commitments or porter transfer commitments or what have you. Well, this is something that we mentioned on our last episode of the show, and it had been discussed that there was a potential for GG Jackson to not end up at North Carolina and decommit and head elsewhere. Well, that has come to pass. With me, as always, the two guys that you really subscribe to the show to hear: Sean Moran, Sherrell McMillan. Sean, how you feeling, dude?
Pretty good, despite this being our first decommitment pod. So hopefully not too many more of those. But
yeah, well, it's the first time for everything. It's just one thing my old man always taught me. Sherrell, how you feeling?
I'm all right. You see, I'm in a collar shirt, so
this is a big deal.
A big day.
Yeah, this is huge. I mean, you've also got like the very comfortable surroundings behind you. You know, you got the couch, you got the very beautiful sun window behind you. I mean, that's. I told Sean before we started, I was fully expecting you to be hosting a high tea today. So, nonetheless, here we are talking about GG Jackson decommitting from North Carolina. Sherrell, I'm going to come to you first. How did we get here?
Yeah, my grandma would say, don't get me the lion. So I will be very careful in the words that I pick. I think from the start, there was some hesitation, I think, from folks around GG, people who know him well, people in the circle, however you want to call it, about North Carolina. Maybe not as much hesitation around North Carolina, but just that much advocacy for South Carolina. And after he committed, even then, there were, kind of faint whispers of stuff happening. But I never really thought that it would get to the point of a decommitment. And I think you can really trace it back to the work that Frank Martin did for South Carolina. They even though he got fired, they should really be giving him an assist, because he kind of had everything worked out so that GG could reclassify into 2022 and then show up in Columbia next month, which makes it easier for him to enter the NBA draft next year. So I think a part of it is a pull to home. I think a part of it is getting to the NBA quicker, this upcoming June. I don't think he dislikes North Carolina. I just think it's one of those situations where, as time went on, kind of the voices around South Carolina and the want to, as far as staying home, all coupled to make him reach decommitment, which is the first one that Carolina has had, in modern ages. People always point back to Tom McMillan. My cousin, not really. Back in the early 70s is the only other one. But, James Curry was signed to UNC, but was let go because of some issues that he had. And then J.R. Smith famously went nuts in the McDonald's game and decided to go pro. But other than that, this is uncharted territory for UNC.
I think something that has been discussed, and again, I want to give a shout out. I came on here and essentially myself, I'm not saying Sherrell or Sean did this or Inside Carolina did this. I felt like the reporting a few weeks ago from another reporter that's unaffiliated with any school felt erroneous. And it turns out that, there was some credence to that, or we wouldn't be having this discussion today. But Sherrell, one of the things I think that has been discussed on the Inside Carolina Premium Message Board as this has trended this way, and again, nod to you for kind of reporting things as you could without violating any trust and any relationships you have. I think some folks here feel like that North Carolina did not want GG Jackson to come next year. And can you disprove or comment to any of the things that you know about how possible it may have been for GG to attend North Carolina so that, he could still get to the league a year early, like he's now considering, and all of the things that we're talking about right now? Was that ever on the table for North Carolina? And if so, what changed?
Yeah, it definitely was. Hindsight being 2020, it worked out really well for UNC. So the timeline goes, GG commits at the end of April. I think it was April 27th or April 28th, like a Wednesday. That Sunday was the deadline to enter the transfer portal, and Kerwin Walton entered the transfer portal, giving North Carolina one scholarship available. And so from June 1st, from May 1st until June 16th, essentially when Pete Nance took his official visit, UNC had a scholarship open. And we do know that during that time, it was discussed, with Gigi and his family about reclassing into UNC. And I think that was just not something that they said they wanted to do. Whether or not, something changed in the last few months and made him want to reclass more, or whether or not he just didn't want to reclass at UNC, don't have the answers to. I think the piece that is missing from the entire puzzle, it does seem as you start to go back and reconstruct all this, going back to January. And trust me, I've done it a ton over the last couple of days, more so than I probably needed to. But it does seem like reclassing in 2022 was always the goal. And so the question is, why commit to UNC if that was the goal? I think maybe everyone would have saved themselves a little bit of grief on both sides had Gigi not committed and just made this announcement that he was going to go to South Carolina in 2022 or whatever he decides to do in July. If he had just done that, I don't think anyone would be that upset. I think the issue that UNC fans seem to be having is just because he did say, I wanted to be at UNC, it's the place for me, et cetera, et cetera. And again, North Carolina's never had a decommitment in basketball, that many of us listening remember. So I think that was a unique situation, but he did have the option to reclass at UNC in 2022. Now, UNC would have allowed that because they like Gigi that much. I don't think that necessarily was a preference. This is just me speaking my opinion. I don't think that was necessarily a preference for them, but I think they would have taken him, or they did offer it to him if he wanted it.
I appreciate you clearing that up, Sean. I think the timing of this can't be overlooked and probably cannot be overstated. Thinking about the way Gigi performed at the NBPA, obviously that changed a lot of the kind of the discussion and the national discourse around his future, both long-term and immediate. So can you give a little bit of insight as to why what he did at the NBPA is so important, and why, the things that he showed at that particular showcase may have changed kind of his short-term pro prospects?
Well, I think even before NBPA, you can back up to USA U18 because I think in the spring AAU periods he played well, but he was playing on a team with dominant guards that were taking a lot of shots, and he was playing well with what he could do. But even though he was considered by 24/7 the number one player, didn't really have that grand overview of what a number one player is. And then that started to change. I really think it did start with USA Basketball, because you go into a very competitive setting. He's been in junior camps before, but this was really the first tryout experience. And with it, you have guys that are going into their freshman year currently. And, in my opinion, if he gets cut from that, maybe he's not as ready as a lot of people now think. However, he does make the team. He comes off the bench. His second game, he has, I think, 20 points. A lot of it came in the blowout time, but he was throwing down, crazy fast break dunks and picking pockets at the 3-point line. He didn't play the rest of the tournament, but I think that's where it started. And then he comes home. He goes to the NBPA, where Sherrell was, and by all accounts played fantastic and was the MVP. And I think those two together, all of a sudden you have a guy that dominated high school, won the state championship, maybe thinking about Oak Hill or prep school. Now all of a sudden, well, hey, maybe I am ready. Not to mention when we did the podcast 2 weeks ago, that was right around USC and UCLA and all the conference chatter. And in my mind, I kept thinking, once again, this is my own personal thoughts, was money tends to talk in any type of situation, and not money from school, but money from the NBA. And if you can get there earlier, and now you feel more ready than you did before, it's a tough, train to stop. And I think there was a lot of those factors that played a part into everything else that Sherrell was saying as well.
Yeah, and I'll add, Joey. I think, again, thinking about how the fan base has reacted to this news in the last couple of weeks, it's kind of been drip by drip, as opposed to just finding out about it, which maybe was probably a good thing. I think in listening to them, the issue is that he did issue a commitment to UNC. We covered it. We were all there. I think had he not, and just decided to, like I said before, just decided to go to South Carolina in 2022 later on, or whatever school, I don't think anybody would necessarily be upset, because, I mean, let's face it, if you have a lottery ticket, would you cash it in 23 months or 11 months?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not waiting 23 months to cash a lottery ticket. I'm going to do it in 11 months because that's, it's quicker. So I completely understand that. And I think most rational, reasonable people will understand that as well. It's just the fact that it goes back to, well, if this was kind of in the cards and this was something that they were thinking about, what was the impetus to go ahead and commit to UNC? I'm asking questions because I don't know the answer to them, frankly. Was it to reserve a spot? Was it to make sure that UNC didn't move on and go somewhere else and just wanted to keep your options open? I think those are the questions that where we're able to talk to, Gigi and his family would ask. But, I'll go ahead and say, I don't personally, I don't hold any ill will towards the family or to Gigi himself. I still think he's a great kid. I think he's just making a decision that is best for him at the moment. I think, again, it just goes back to, why commit to UNC back in April if all of this was kind of in the background and talked about and, discussed.
Yeah, and I can certainly understand folks that are frustrated from the UNC fan base and from Inside Carolina subscribers. Like, I can understand the frustration. I will also echo that, I think most of us in our wise mind would understand. Use a lottery ticket analogy. I mean, I think about, if you had a chance to go make, generational changing money, you're going to take that opportunity sooner rather than later. And also something I want to throw out there, I've said this on social media a couple of times, but it's going to be the official stance of this podcast. You should never, ever, 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 never tweet at recruits. Just want to get that out there. One of the things I think that is going to be overlooked is that with Gigi not coming to Chapel Hill, he's going to miss out on Johnny T-shirt. And I think that's unfortunate. I think that's probably the biggest travesty in all of this, is that he's not going to have regular access to their store on East Franklin Street. He's not going to have regular access to the 10% off that, he might have if he were an Inside Carolina premium subscriber. He's not going to have regular access to all of the different sorts of gear that Johnny T-shirt can offer you. And that's unfortunate. I think the flip side of that is when he does get to his pro career more quickly, he will be able to purchase all of those fine wares sooner from Johnny T-shirt. And maybe that's what his ulterior motive is here. It says he's actually trying to get to where he can purchase mass quantities of Johnny T-shirt gear sooner rather than later. And for that, nobody can be mad. Johnny T-shirt, big sponsors of this show. We appreciate them. Thankful for their sponsorship, even for a less than positive podcast like we're doing right now here on the Coast to Coast. Let the national guys run some ads. We'll be right back to finish talking about Gigi Jackson, the once committed future Tar Heel, decommitting from the program. Stick around. All right, we're back. Thanks for being here. Coast to Coast Podcast, emergency edition of the show. Sean Moran, Sherrell McMillan. I am merely Joey Powell. Sean, something I want to ask you. What is North Carolina losing? And I guess, the old adage is you can't lose something you never had. But what is this class losing by not getting Gigi Jackson to matriculate?
Well, with him, it was only a two-man class, and you're getting a guy that can play the 4 spot and the 5 spot, a guy that can very versatile defensively, as well as a guy that can really get out in transition. And he was also improving offensively just from a skill perspective, and got to see that NBPA with a lot of his left to right to left crossovers and the jump shots. Even he didn't really dominate at the EYBL that I was at in Kansas City, but you did get to see some of those moves and shots. So from a on-court perspective, you're losing from a defensive standpoint. I think once again, it's rare that 4-5, 5-4 that can really match up, as well as block shots, run the floor, and offer a lot. more from a larger picture, I think UNC's losing a guy that, from an NBA perspective, would have been a high lottery pick, and just kind of having that that from a brand image or an NBA image. So I think those are really like the two different pieces.
So that opens me up for the kind of our next question, and we'll get to wrapping it up here on the Coast to Coast. Sean, what's next for UNC? Sherrell, I'm going to ask you specifically about who they might target, but Sean, what do you think they're going to look to find in the 2023 class to replace that? Do they go with a guy that has a similar skill set as GG, or are they looking for a guy that can fit that role of a 4-5 or a traditional 4?
I think they'll definitely look for somebody, but projecting out, which is even harder to do now in the transfer portal age, one that can help solve issues down the road, but also seeing the progression of a Styles, a Puff, even Tyler Nickel, Jalen Washington. There's a lot of questions around how they'll perform this year, and some of that could be solved by how they do and how they're looking going into that next season. I think you will see, and we've already seen a few of the, let's say, 4s or in Zayden High 4-5 that have been offered. So I think UNC will pursue it. Now it's a little bit later, but between who they potentially could have on their team that would be in their second or third year, as well as the transfer portal, I think it can be solved without a lot of hand wringing.
All right, Sherrell, and I'll wrap with you here, man. What do you think is next for North Carolina? I mean, obviously, some offers have gone out. We get into those more in the traditional episode of the Coast to Coast. But what do you think is next for this staff? How are they going to kind of regroup and move forward?
I think they already have, and you talked about those two offers. I mean, we'll mention them more this weekend. But Zayden High and TJ Power, two guys who play on the EYBL circuit, two guys who fit that description of kind of taller, rangy guys who are skilled, which is what they're looking for at that slot. So that's a start. And then they'll continue to mine, the class. And the good thing I think about the way basketball is now is that it's never good, or it doesn't help or anything like that to lose someone like Gigi Jackson, the
number one player in the class.
Yeah, that's never a good thing at all. But I think now it can be mitigated a little bit better than it could, say, 10 years ago. Because, it's always been, as far as roster management and talent acquisition, it's been, well, once November hits, you can try to sign whoever's left in the spring, which usually isn't a lot of people. You look to the guys who have decommitted or been let out of their national letter of intent, and you look towards graduate transfers. And that was always kind of the 3 buckets. But now there's that 4th bucket, which, I mean, let's be honest, is college free agency. So the free agent season essentially begins, in March, and will wrap up sometime usually around May. Excuse me. So they have opportunities to continue to build and put talent on next year's team. But I do think, to Sean's point, if just a couple of the guys who they have already hit and they sign someone else, then I think, like I said, they can mitigate this loss. But again, not to sugarcoat, it's not good to lose the number 1 player in the country. But as an aside, I'll also add, I don't think you can put any blame whatsoever of this on Hubert Davis and his staff. I think that they did what they needed to do. They hung in there through a very tough recruitment that they had some advantages in, but that also they had some disadvantages in. And in the end, well, not the very end, in the first ending, they got the player to commit. So I think that still speaks highly to his ability to recruit. So I don't think fans should worry when it comes to that. And just moving forward, man, I do wonder what this means, if anything, for how UNC approaches some of the top tier guys. Because it's not I can imagine it's not a great feeling to get that phone call if you're Hubert Davis after the energy you've invested in that particular player. So I am looking forward to seeing if this alters their approach at all. I don't know whether it will. I feel like it might even make him more resolute than he is now when it comes to what they're looking for. But it is something that we're definitely be tracking.
And North Carolina fans cannot say they did not use every arrow in their quiver, because as recently as last weekend, the staff was watching Gigi Jackson play basketball. So I don't know what else folks could have expected from Hubert and his staff to get this young man to Chapel Hill. Sherrell, I'm going to wrap with this. You used this in a conversation we were having earlier this week, but from Coach Smith, I think he said it best, and I think you'll agree with this. But something that our listeners should probably take away from this show is Coach Smith's line about if you come here, North Carolina will have a chance to win a national championship. If you don't come here, North Carolina will have a chance to win a national championship. And I think that's probably not changing as much as it may feel massively impactful to have the number one player in the 2023 class decommit. I still think the takeaway, like you and Sean so eloquently put, will be the same as far as roster management and quality of player in the program. Anything else you guys want to add before we get out of here on this special edition of the show? What was that? There was a thought there, man.
I feel like no matter what I say, I'm going to get yelled at, once this is over offline. So I would say it has been a very, Ben says not to use interesting. It's been a remarkable recruitment to cover for a variety of reasons. Mm-hmm. And it was one where kind of every time you thought you knew what was going to happen, something else happened. And I think that just speaks to the pressure, frankly, that happens when you are one of these top players in the country. And I know some people are upset, and rightfully so. I'm not telling you shouldn't be, with the way maybe that parts of it have been handled. But I would also say that it's just, if you haven't been doing this and haven't been in this, and then your son is magically the number one player in the country, mm-hmm. It is a different world than you're used to. It is phone calls from people like me from 5 different, schools. So you had that, and then you've got 3 different assistant coaches from the schools recruiting you, and then the head coaches, and then you probably have agents calling you, and you probably have all kinds of personnel people calling you, and everybody just wanting a piece, whether it's information or whether it's to one day, curry favor. It is a very difficult process. And again, I'm not saying it was handled the best, but I'm just saying that I think people should give a little grace, because that is something that until you're thrown into it, you just have no idea what all it entails. Even us who follow recruiting, people on the board who follow recruiting, who have seen and heard all these stories, if their son became the number one player in the country, they wouldn't be prepared for it either. It's just something you have to learn and kind of experience and then live through. So like I said, not saying people shouldn't be upset, but I would ask for just a touch of grace, moving forward, because like you said, Carolina's going to move on. Jackson's going to move on to, wherever he goes, and that's it. So there's no need to rehash it over and over and over. North Carolina's going to be okay. G.G. Jackson's going to be okay, and on it goes.
Yeah, and I don't think any of us can fault a kid and his family for doing what they think is best for them. And Sherrell, I'm going to shock you with this. I've never been that popular where that many people were calling me to ask me and wanted a piece of me. I know that might come as a shock to you, but I'm not familiar with that. So no, I can't understand what Gigi and his family have been going through, but appreciate your perspective as always. Sean, thanks for giving us the insight that you bring. Guys, thanks for making time for this emergency edition of the Coast to Coast podcast. Again, for our listeners, wish it was better news for you. Just think, for every bad one of these, there's been 50 good ones about a player committing or a player coming back or whatever. So North Carolina's next moves we will cover in detail in the next episode of the Coast to Coast podcast here.
I'm going to interrupt you. Sorry.
No, it's
Last
all right.
thing. That's the other thing. North Carolina is going to have the number one team in the country in the preseason. So while I understand the frustration, like, think about what you have if you're a North Carolina fan, what you have beginning in late September, an opportunity to do something special, opportunity to do something great, an experienced team, maybe the most experienced team in Carolina history, with a wonderful, by all accounts, transfer who's going to, could start at the 4, and just experience and talent. So focus on that, I would say.
Hey, and worst case scenario, go watch the last 3 minutes of the Duke game in the Final Four. I don't know anybody that can watch that and not feel good about where this program is going. But as Sherrell and Sean have brought so much to the table once again, Stick around. We'll have a regular episode of the Coast to Coast coming up. We'll record it this coming Sunday. It'll be in your feed Sunday night, early Monday. As usual, we'll keep you abreast of anything that's happening around the Carolina basketball program, because that's what Inside Carolina is known for. But for Sherrell McMillan, for Sean Moran, I'm Joey Powell. Remember, like, subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff. Give JohnnyT-shirt.com a visit. Shout out to John Siegley for producing. We will catch you guys next time on the Coast to Coast podcast. Late.